It is the Thursday Awesemo NBA strategy show sponsored by PrizePicks, and only 5 games on the slate, but there's a lot to talk about because we have a full injury report. Officially, LeBron James listed questionable, Donovan Mitchell questionable, DeAndre Ayton questionable, Al Horford potential rest candidate with being the tail end of back-to-back, Lou Dort is questionable, Royce O'Neal questionable, Daniel Tice questionable, Cameron Payne questionable, Dwight Howard questionable, and I'm here with Adam Scherer, shit my money, to run through all of the news and everything we have to talk about. But Adam, how you doing today?
Uh, been better. I lost my first head-to-head to Ben the Better last night, so I feel really, really bad about myself. Um, but no, it looks like a slate where we're gonna have a lot to talk about. 3 teams, I think, on back-to-backs. So don't have those injury reports yet. But potential for guys to rest there. So for a 5 gamer, I think that there's gonna be a lot to talk about. There's gonna be a pretty good number of good options, even though there's only 10 teams to pick from.
How many head-to-heads do you think you've played against Ben the Better at this point?
I can tell you in a second, but probably like 9 or 10.
I mean, even just the fact that it took him this long to win is pretty ridiculous, and also a little bit luck driven, because even if you have a massive edge over him, it's not like you're going to be winning head-to-heads against him 90% of the time.
Yeah.
So
someone like he posted the screenshot last night, and somebody replied and was like, "I'll take Adam 9 out of 10 times," and I was just like, "I'll take Adam like 6.5 out of 10 times,
yeah.
or 7 out of 10 times." Like,
it is one of those things where it's like, what do you like in general? Even if he's making suboptimal plays, you're projected to beat him by like 7 or 8 points. So it is kind of crazy that it took that long for him to finally win one. But I'm sure he's going to be riding high off that as a massive DFS accomplishment and go on big things with his Slack channel. But we also have today's slate to talk about, and I think right away, just getting into this first game, it is the Philadelphia 76ers at the Detroit Pistons. We've got the 76ers as a pretty significant favorite. But I want to start by asking you about Cade Cunningham, who's still relatively cheap on DraftKings, pretty cheap on FanDuel, cheaper on DK. And I know that everybody's going to look at Cade Cunningham's first couple games and be like, this guy sucks, bust, because of how poorly he shot in the first 2 games. But I almost think we have to look at what happened last game as a positive for his fantasy output, even if that might seem like a little bit questionable for people to think that way, because he made 0% of his shots from 3, but he was willing to take them. So he's been taking a bunch of shots while he's out on the court. The minutes restriction appears gone. He played 29 and a half minutes last game. And I still think he's going to be a guy that we have to expect is somewhere around a fantasy point per minute producer this year. So what are you going to be doing with Cade Cunningham, considering how much he's struggled, but is still a well-regarded rookie and is cheap, at least on DK?
yeah, I agree with you that the performance was unbelievably bad, but overall, I kind of I took it as a positive. Like, that was a slate where I had 98% Cunningham, and I'm kind of just looking at my teams and seeing him doing terribly, and I'm like, okay, maybe maybe I went a little bit crazy here. Maybe, that was a mistake. And then I go and look at what he did. And I was just like, if you tell me Cade Cunningham at 3,600 goes out there, plays 29 minutes, shoots, I think like 14 times, like I would play him in every single lineup. So it's just, guys have bad games. It's the second ever NBA game. He's going to have more bad ones going forward, but 2 for 14 shooting. I mean, 14 shots, 29 minutes. The rebounding wasn't as good as it was his first time out, but he's been, relatively involved in terms of peripherals. 9.8% rebounding percentage, 18.5% assist percentage through his first 2 games, 23.7% usage rate. He has a 17.4% true shooting percentage. That, like, obviously that's not going to continue. We've been talking about guys at the beginning of the year that are shooting like 42, 43% and saying, there's no way they're that bad, it'll get better. 17%, very, very clearly coming up very quickly. So, I mean, I think that last game from a DFS standpoint was an overall net positive, even though it was one of the worst games I've ever seen.
Yeah, and pulling up his college stats, which I don't generally really like to look at college stats, but we're talking about the first overall pick in the draft. We have no real NBA data to go off of. He's played 1.5 NBA games, and he shot the ball well in college. He shot 40% from 3. He shot 84.6% from the free throw line. So I know a lot of people look at his 3-point shooting and be like, well, it's a closer line, but when somebody shoots 84.6% from the free throw line in college, that's somebody who's capable of shooting the basketball. It was a long layoff for Cade Cunningham. He had the ankle injury. He's going to put it together sooner rather than later. The price point, once again, 4,000 on DK, that is going to be something that I'm going to be getting to a whole bunch. 4,600 on FanDuel. Does that feel any differently to you? I mean, he's projected for 24% ownership on FanDuel. I assume that's a number I'm still going to be well over the top of the 4,600.
Yeah, I still think that looks like a good salary given that he played 29 minutes last game. I thought that it was encouraging that he came back in a blowout because they had said before the game that they were lifting the minutes restriction. But whenever you see somebody come back when you see somebody play a few extra minutes when they don't have to, that to me signals that the team is actively looking to ramp up their minutes. And it makes sense. I mean, obviously they want Cade Cunningham to play a bunch of minutes. So the fact that he came back and got that final stint just makes me feel even more confident in his playing time. If that game's competitive, does he play 33 minutes or 34 minutes? But even at 30 minutes, at 4,600, that's a reasonable value. Obviously, there's a little bit more risk on FanDuel than DraftKings just because he's a little bit more expensive. But I think that either way, he's underpriced for what his role is going to be going forward.
Yeah, and then looking at the rest of the players on Detroit, I really don't have all that much interest. The real reason to like Cade Cunningham is just because of the pricing, but I found the front court minutes have been really difficult to predict so far for the Pistons this year. We know Jeremy Grant's going to play sizable minutes, but once again, he's fairly expensive on FanDuel and DraftKings. You got somebody like Saddiq Bey, his production usage has been all over the place. Same goes with guys like Kelly Olynyk, Isaiah Stewart. Kelly Olynyk, especially in hindsight, really odd player that they signed to a big contract in the offseason because they haven't been playing him consistent big minutes. So I don't really like a whole lot else from this team. If I had to roster somebody, I guess it would be Saddiq Bey, but he's projected for 24.4% ownership on DraftKings. That feels a little bit rich to me. Is there anybody here that you see as anything more than a flyer?
No, not really outside of Cunningham. Jeremy Grant, we know, gives you a high ceiling, but he's also become really scoring dependent. His rebounding numbers have not been very good this year. I guess, pretty much in line with what he done in the past, but 8% rebounding percentage, 12.8% assist percentage, 25.9% usage rate is good, but, you really need the big scoring game out of him, which makes him a little bit riskier. Saddiq Bey's played pretty well, but his salary's come up. Olynyk is always kind of interesting to me in tournaments just because he's a really good point per minute producer, but he's really risky because of the playing time. I mean, he played 16 and a half minutes last game. There's going to be some games where he closes and plays 27 minutes. So that's why he's kind of appealing in tournaments. Just if you happen to hit on that game where he's in the closing lineup and, at low ownership, it's appealing, but obviously the floor is extremely low. So outside of Cunningham, nothing really stands out to me here.
All right, so let's jump over to the Sixers side. And once again, this is a team that is going to be shorthanded. We all know the Ben Simmons situation as an ongoing thing, but also Tobias Harris. He remains out because he's in COVID protocols. Then we've got Danny Green. He's out with a hamstring injury. So it's a pretty shorthanded Sixers team. Opens up a lot of value on the wing. But I also want to start by asking about Joel Embiid. Tail end of a back-to-back. We know about the knee issues that Joel Embiid has had. Do you have any concerns with the minutes load that we might see Joel Embiid play, considering this is a game on the road against a pretty beatable Pistons team, and it's the tail end of a back-to-back?
I'm not super concerned about the minutes. I'm more so concerned about, is he going to play? If he plays, I'm still going to assume he plays like 30 to 32 minutes. He played 34 last night. I wouldn't project that, but I'd be surprised if they play him and then do something like, he's going to play 26 minutes. I think it's more likely they just say, okay, he's not going to play tonight. In which case, obviously, play Andre Drummond. But assuming Embiid is in the starting lineup for now, I'm going to, assume he plays 30 to 32 minutes or something in there.
Yeah, and like you, I'm also a little uncertain on if he actually plays, and I don't really think we have too much we have to add in terms of analysis. If Joel Embiid doesn't play, there's extra usage to guys like Tyrese Maxey, Furkan Korkmaz, Shake Milton, Andre Drummond, just obvious, easy plug and play. If Joel Embiid doesn't play, we saw this the other day when Drummond started in place of Embiid. He basically just put up the same numbers he did in the past when he was a starter. And fantasy production has never been an issue for Andre Drummond. He's not a good real life player, but he puts up stats when he's on the court. It's just he makes weird decisions on offense and turns the ball over a lot. He's also a terrible defensive player, but none of that really matters for DFS. So as long as if there was a situation where Joel Embiid is out and Drummond starts, he would still be the best overall value play on the slate. But what are you going to be doing with some of these other guys who are going to be seeing extended minutes with Tobias Harris out? One thing that we talked about for the show start is that we do have a whole bunch of ownership projected to go to Matisse Thybulle. He's projected for 32% ownership over on DK. On FanDuel, he's projected for 38% ownership. Now, the main reason here is that with Tobias Harris out last game and Danny Green out, we saw Matisse Thybulle enter the starting lineup. He ended up playing 38 minutes. So I think that he certainly has to be considered a viable option, but do you think the ownership is warranted?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of surprised at the ownership when we pulled it up, but it makes sense just given that he played 38 minutes last night and he's likely to play a lot of minutes again. I mean, there's paths to him playing fewer minutes. Like Korkmaz could take some of those. Korkmaz could close over Thibault in some game scripts. Maybe Shake Milton plays a little bit more sometimes. He disappointed last night. I thought that we were going to get a few more minutes out of him, but in general, I expect big minutes from Matisse Thybulle again. He's not a great fantasy option, only a 9.8% usage rate this year, but he does give you defensive stat upside. He's averaging 0.74 DraftKings points per minute this year. Better on FanDuel because of their scoring, rewarding defensive stats more. Absolutely insane defensive numbers so far this year. 194 minutes played, 5 steals per 100 possessions, and 3 blocks per 100 possessions. Those are probably coming down, but just insane rates, and give you an idea of the upside he gives you from a defensive standpoint. So at 3,600 in that many minutes, he's fine. He's not going to be a fun guy to sweat most likely, but he just projects as a good value.
Yeah, the last 4 games, Matisse Thybulle's defensive stats: 3 steals, 2 blocks, 3 steals, 1 block, 4 steals, 3 blocks, 3 steals, no blocks. Just been crazy in terms of racking up defensive stats. And that's also something that I talked about last night. We were doing live before lock with Matisse Thybulle starting. Is you look at him over on FanDuel, massively different player on FanDuel versus DraftKings. And I can't even think of anybody else who's quite like this, because so much of his production comes from defensive stats and just doesn't deliver much else. So he had a decent fantasy game yesterday with a 5% usage rate, just really based on defensive stats. So he kind of stands on his own in terms of differential between FanDuel and DraftKings. Anybody else here that you're looking at? Maybe like George Niang, who was oddly popular yesterday, or Furkan Korkmaz, Tyrese Maxey. Any of them really stand out to you, or just guys that benefit that are worth a little bit of exposure to?
Yeah, more so just guys that I'll be like mixing and matching in, because the price tags on Korkmaz and Niang have increased a bit. Niang is apparently the best 3-point shooter in the history of the NBA. I didn't know that. But he's just making every 3 that he takes. But I mean, the minutes are there. He played 31 and a half minutes. Again, the caution on him would be, he's played 30 plus minutes in both games with Harris out. He's played incredibly well in both of those games. What happens when he's not making every shot that he takes? I don't think that I think it's very obviously it's in his range of outcomes to be in the closing lineup, and that makes him look good. But I don't think it's a lock. Like, I don't think you should look at those 2 games and say, oh, Niang is a closer. I think that there's still different game scripts, different depending on who's playing well, where sometimes that's Milton, sometimes it's Korkmaz. So I don't think he's locked into those minutes, but they're certainly possible. So still some upside for him, some upside for Korkmaz at 4,700. And I really don't, in large field tournaments, I don't hate the idea of going back to Shake Milton at 3,900. He only played 20 minutes again. That's what he's been playing all season long. But they had said yesterday that he's no longer restricted. So that tells me that even if a lot of times he's going to only play 20 minutes, if he's playing well, he can get those extra minutes also. At 3,900, there's a path to success, even in 20 minutes. So you're not drawing dead. And then, it's just a spot where I would much rather have a low-owned Shake Milton the first time he plays 25 minutes than be chasing that at, 20% the next day. So I think, mixing any of those guys is fine. Maxey gets more usage without Harris. And then, if Embiid's out, it looks even better for Maxey. He played a ton of minutes last night as well. And then Seth Curry takes on a bigger role. He is pretty expensive, but if Embiid were to sit, I think potentially it looks even better for Curry. So I think that Thybulle's the best value here, but there's a lot of guys that you can get to. Even Embiid, I mean, if he plays at 10-5, it's risky because there is some risk that I'm wrong and he plays just fewer minutes today, and he hasn't played great by his standards this year, but I'm not overly concerned about that. He typically produces really, really well without Harris and Simmons. So at 10-5, if he's able to go against this front court, he looks good too.
Yeah, and then once again, it's going to be something a little dependent on news. Will Joe Embiid not play? I think that is certainly something that we're going to get more information on later in the day. And that is something that will be updated later on in our NBA player projections. Those are free over at Awesemo.com. That is one of the best resources that you get in terms of data for all fantasy basketball player projections. Huge for NBA DFS also. We've got Adam's NBA Deep Dive article, which is probably the most comprehensive free article that anybody's writing anywhere in our industry. That's also free and something you guys should be checking out over at Awesemo.com. And that's also something where Adam will be sitting down and be looking through his projections and trying to figure out some of the plays he really likes, writing it all up. So highly suggest you guys check out Adam's free article every day. All right, the next game that we have here to talk about, it is the Boston Celtics against the Miami Heat. And starting on the Heat side, the first thing we have to bring up is just the piss poor rebounding of the Boston Celtics. This team cannot grab a rebound for anything. I don't know if you saw this number the other day, but 2 games ago, the Celtics blew or 3 days ago, the Celtics blew a massive fourth quarter lead. They got outscored 38-11. They grabbed 0 defensive rebounds in the entire fourth quarter of that game. So I look at somebody like Bam Adebayo in this spot, who's reasonably priced on DraftKings and FanDuel, a little more expensive on FanDuel and DK. But I think he has massive rebounding upside in this spot. He's going to be really popular today. But one of my favorite cash game plays on the slate is Bam Adebayo. How do you like him in this matchup against the Celtics?
Yeah, I think he looks great. He's playing at a really, really high level this year. Usage rate is up at 28.5% from about 24% last year, 21.7% total rebounding percentage. Last I checked, I'm pulling it up now, but I believe he's third in the NBA in rebound chances per game, which obviously is very, very good. He's producing 1.32 DraftKings points per minute, and he's still pretty cheap. So I'm right there with you. I think he looks like a great option.
Yeah, and then talking about the other stars, I mean, I don't really understand all the ownership that Jimmy Butler's been picking up, and it's not to say that Jimmy Butler isn't a good player because he clearly is, but he's $9,600 over on DraftKings. On FanDuel, Jimmy Butler's priced at $10,300. He's still projected for over 20% ownership on both sides. Is there something I'm missing here with Jimmy Butler that he's this expensive and still projected for north of 20% ownership?
My guess is that I haven't built lineups yet. A lot of times in a situation like that, it's just that like he ends up fitting in nicely just as like, positionally or whatever, because like clearly, and I think you agree, like he's a good play. Like he's Jimmy Butler. He's good, but he's probably a little bit overpriced. My guess is just that like once I start crunching lineups, maybe he just fits nicely at small forward. But other than that, I'm with you. He does seem a little bit more expensive, especially relative like than he should be, but especially relative to Bam. $1,500 more for Butler seems like a lot when Butler's averaging 1.4 DraftKings points per minute. Bam's averaging 1.32. 1.4 obviously is great. 29.2% usage rate, 26.4% assist percentage. I think Butler looks really good, but I just think that you're kind of paying a premium for him compared to some other guys.
Yeah, and then the other core piece to talk about from the Miami Heat and somebody else, massive price difference on DraftKings versus FanDuel. So on DK, Kyle Lowry is priced at $7,700. On FanDuel, he's only $5,900. I don't understand why Kyle Lowry isn't picking up more ownership. And this was also something I'd said the other day for FanDuel purposes when Lowry was also at $5,900. He should be just a stone cold chalk play on a smallish slate at 5,900, and he's not. He's projected for right about the same ownership as Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler 10,300, Kyle Lowry at 5,900. Lowry's almost half the price of Jimmy Butler. They're projected for the same ownership. I really like Lowry at 5,900 on FanDuel. He should be way higher owned than 23%, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a pretty good price tag. I mean, he's done virtually nothing as far as usage goes this year, but he's still averaging 0.9 FanDuel points per minute, 15.6% usage rate. He does have a 31% assist percentage, which leads the team. I think that there's a chance going forward the usage rate comes up a little bit, but I also do think it's a legitimate concern that Lowry just is essentially the fourth option offensively because you have Tyler Hero taking on such a big role, and then you have Butler and Bam with increased usage as well. It's just, I think that Lowry's role on this team is just, going to be a little bit more muted than it was in Toronto from an offensive standpoint, or at least a scoring standpoint. That doesn't mean he's not going to have games though where he goes out there and scores more than average. That's kind of how averages work. So I do agree that where the price tag is cheap, he makes sense. On DraftKings, it's at a point where, there's some temptation to just go to a low owned, 4% Kyle Lowry and hope you get that game. But I'm not that inclined to do it at his DraftKings salary.
All right. And then in terms of other guys on the Heat, I know that some people are going to gravitate towards Tyler Hero a little bit. I don't know. I think that we're getting to a point now with Tyler Hero where you look at where he's currently priced. So Tyler Hero is $6,400 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, Tyler Hero is $6,700. Once again, a player is picking up a little bit of ownership. I get he's looked really good this year. I think that he's rightfully the front runner to win Sixth Man of the Year to this point. I don't know. This is a salary that I'm dying to get to when he's actually picking up some ownership. I have Hero projected for a little over 30 fantasy points. So I think this is about appropriate. I saw some people bring up in the chat. Do you think that Tyler Hero keeps his current run going in terms of how efficient he's been shooting the ball? And do you want to get to him at salary a little over 6,000?
Yeah, so the ownership is what kind of makes me feel torn here because I've actually been a little bit higher on Hero this year definitely higher than I have been in the past. He's playing, 32 to 34 minutes in competitive games pretty frequently. He has the highest usage rate on the team at 29.8%, but also his rebounding percentage is up about a point from last year to 10%. His assist percentage is up like 4 points to 22.6%. He's averaging 1.18 DraftKings points per minute, 57.7% true shooting percentage this year, 54.4% since the start of last year. So shooting a little bit hot, but not like he's doing anything crazy in that regard. So I am buying into him being a better fantasy option now than he has been in the past. It's still a little bit scary paying, $6,700 for a 20% owned guy coming off the bench. So I think he's just kind of a neutral play to me. I don't think he's a bad play. I wouldn't tell anyone that like they're making a mistake playing Hero in some lineups, but at his current ownership, I'm not overly excited to get there. I don't anticipate that I'm just like jamming over the field either. I just think I probably mix him into around 20% of my lineups.
All right. And then on the Celtics side of the game, one of the things that I look at with Jimmy Butler is in comparison to Jason Tatum. I have Jimmy Butler and Tatum projected very, very similar today, just in terms of raw fantasy points. Yet we just talked about the ownership that's going to Jimmy Butler. Reese project for north of 20% ownership. We've only got 8% ownership going to Jason Tatum. So when I'm looking at pivot plays to make, I think that Tatum is a pretty easy pivot to get to off of Butler. Tatum's been really inefficient to start the year, and a lot of it's been shot selection. He is taking way less shots to the rim this year, way more contested jump shots, which maybe I know people have been joking, but maybe there's something to it that his biggest influence in basketball was Kobe Bryant, and maybe he's trying to emulate that. But Jason Tatum seems to be going out of his way to take difficult shots. But I think that's going to have to correct itself a little bit going forward. And long story short, he is projected, for me at least, about the same amount of fantasy points as Jimmy Butler, right around the same price, but Tatum only has a third of the ownership. So I really like that as a pivot play. Do you like it in Jason Tatum today?
I think what you're saying makes sense. I kind of just like think about it from like a macro view where Tatum's still really damn good. And he's got that, very, very high ceiling at low ownership. And so it's a spot where, like this matchup sucks against Miami. He hasn't been playing that great this year. He's only averaging 1.13 DraftKings points per minute. So like when you compare him to Butler on average, Butler's averaging like 0.3 of a fantasy point per minute more than Tatum, and Butler has the better matchup. So I think Butler's the better play. But at the same time, we talk a lot about roster construction and mixing contrarian plays into your lineup without your lineup being too contrarian. Tatum's like the perfect kind of guy where if you happen to have a lineup that's pretty chalky, you need a lower owned guy in that price range. You don't want to throw in 20% Jimmy Butler. Tatum at least gives you that same ceiling as Butler at lower ownership. So I don't view it as a spot where I'm like going out of my way to play Jason Tatum over Butler, but I do think Tatum is, and really Jaylen Brown also, is the type of guy where at low ownership, I like just mixing into lineups where I need a contrarian piece because I know I'm not sacrificing ceiling. I'm sacrificing medium production a little bit, but either one of these guys can just go out there and give you a monster game.
Yeah, and still, like you said, difficult matchup against the Miami Heat. So every player on the Celtics currently projected for under 10% ownership. The Heat currently the number one rated defense in all league in terms of defensive efficiency. So I'm also not really dying to get to anybody from the Celtics. I have Jason Tatum some in my initial build of lineups, mostly just because of the low ownership, and I haven't projected decently well. Nobody else really stands out to me from the Celtics. This is one of my least favorite teams to get to. Is there anybody that does stand out to you from Boston as being a good play outside of potentially Tatum as a lower owned tournament option?
So you had mentioned at the top of the show, maybe Al Horford rests today. I think that that's pretty important news because if Horford plays at 7,400, I do have some interest there. The price tag has gotten a little bit aggressive, but he's playing insanely well this year. 1.36 DraftKings points per minute, 18.5% rebounding percentage, 20% assist percentage, 20% usage rate. He looks really, really good. And so I still think that there's a pretty nice ceiling for him, although, it is a difficult matchup. But also if he sits, I think that's a bump for Robert Williams, who we've seen kind of disappear this year, particularly when he's playing alongside Horford. Williams in the past has been well over a fantasy point per minute guy. This year, he's at 0.91 fantasy points per minute, but he's played 55 minutes alongside Al Horford. He's only averaged 0.72 DraftKings points per minute. He has a 12.5% rebounding percentage over those minutes. So if Horford were to sit, I think things start to look a little bit better for a relatively inexpensive Robert Williams. He's played, whoops, took the wrong guy off. I'm trying to see what his rates look like without Horford on the floor. He's played 166 minutes without Horford, 14.2% rebounding percentage, 0.98 DraftKings points per minute. So his production's been down either way from where he was last year. But Horford has had a pretty negative impact as well. So Horford, if he's in, I like in tournaments. If he's out, I like getting some Robert Williams.
If you guys have not done yet, do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. The reason you're going to want to do that is because we have basically an unlimited amount of DFS content. Here's our schedule for today. NFL strategy show. We have that. We have an MMA strategy show, NHL strategy show, a lot of strategy shows. You guys love your strategy. NHL, MMA, NHL, all covered. Then we've got the NBA deeper dive later, NBA live before lock, and NFL live before lock for the Thursday night game. So like this video, subscribe to the channel so you can get all of the content and information that you need to make money in every single DFS sport that is out there. But moving on here, we have the Atlanta Hawks at home against the Utah Jazz. Only a 1-point spread in this game, which shows how much respect the Atlanta Hawks are getting right now from sports books, because a game against the Utah Jazz where I think Utah might be the best team in the league, at least from a regular season perspective. And we've got this as a 1-point spread here, but I still don't have a whole lot of interest in the Atlanta Hawks side of the game. Trae Young, difficult matchup against Utah. Clint Capella has not quite been getting the same minutes that I thought he could potentially get getting into the season. Also, John Collins has been playing a lot this year. That's cut into some of the rebound numbers from Clint Capella. Is there anything you really like here from Atlanta? Because this is another team that I don't really think makes for the best target.
Yeah, I think they're pretty tough to get to. I have been encouraged by Capella's playing time recently. He started out the year playing, high 20s in minutes, but over his last 3 games, and this is going from memory, so it could be slightly off, but in general, over his last 3 games, he had, I think, like 31 minutes in a blowout where he lost like a few minutes at the end. Then he played, I think, 33 minutes. Last night, he played 32.6 minutes. He didn't close. They went with a small lineup, but that was against the Nets, who were using Blake Griffin at center. Here you have Rudy Gobert. So I think this is a spot where you could see 33 minutes from Capella, but so I think he has a very high ceiling. The issue is, like you said, not producing it as quite a high level this year either. Only 1.07 DraftKings points per minute. Usage rate is down to 14.9%. Rebounding is still, pretty solid, 22.3% rebounding percentage. So basically, I think he's risky, for a couple of reasons, the production being down and potentially his minutes not being where we want them to be on a back-to-back. But I do think he has a pretty high ceiling that we haven't really seen yet. And this is a matchup where I expect him to be on the floor as much as he can.
Yeah, and by the way, apparently, let me check if this is true. Somebody said that, by the way, Rudy Gay is not out. Rudy Gay is out, not Rudy Gobert. And I think it looks like there's somewhere somebody messed up the injury report. It looks like FanDuel, which would not be surprising at all. I'm just checking the app really quick to see if that. Okay, so yeah, that's why people are confused. Over on FanDuel, they have Rudy Gobert listed as out today. Rudy Gobert is not out. What they have listed is Rudy Gobert has been ruled out against the Hawks due to right heel injury recovery. He doesn't have a heel injury. That is Rudy Gay. They got the 2 Rudys mixed up there. Rudy Gay out. Rudy Gobert will be playing. Now, with that said, Donovan Mitchell is listed as questionable to play. I'm not massively concerned about it. I'm just assuming he plays. Actually, something Adam, you and I had a really short back and forth with on Twitter the other day, because I had noticed that Donovan Mitchell turned his ankle at the right before halftime of the Jazz last game. I thought it looked pretty bad. You had said to me that, hey, halftime players go into the locker room a couple minutes early from time to time. You didn't think it was going to be a big deal. Ultimately, Donovan Mitchell came back, played really well. I assume he plays without any issues, but he is officially listed as questionable today, so I think we should at least make mention of that. Any real concerns with you as it comes to Donovan Mitchell today?
No, as long as he plays, I assume he's good to go. He is listed as questionable. People in chat are naming all of the different places that have Gobert listed out because they all copy from each other. Yeah, like maybe he gets ruled out between now and lock, but he is not on the injury report. So Mitchell he's questionable. I'm assuming he's good to go. He came back. He had a big game. I assume he's fine. 9,400 is a pretty expensive price tag for him. Don't love the spot here. So he's kind of just one of those guys where he's got a really high ceiling. We know that, but I'm not prioritizing him like I was last game.
Yeah, and I think we should also just talk about in a situation where Donovan Mitchell does not play, which once again, I do not think is the most likely outcome. By the way, watch Rudy Gobert, something crazy happen, like he trips and falls getting off the bus, and everybody like, yeah, I told you so. But yeah, this is, like Adam said, this is just some issue with, I think RotoWire does the injury updates for a lot of these sites, and they just kind of copy paste from there. And it's almost certainly an intern that does it also, who just copy and paste the wrong information over. It would be funny if that actually dramatically changes what the ownership is for tonight's slate. But let's talk about it. If Donovan Mitchell does not play, I'll be looking at Jordan Clarkson and Joe Ingles as the 2 primary options. Ingles likely moving into the starting lineup, picking up usage. Also, Jordan Clarkson extend minutes from Royce O'Neal is also listed as questionable to play. Not a massive impact there, but there would be some more minutes that opened up. Joe Ingles, Jordan Clarkson, would you agree those both become fairly high priority plays if Mitchell doesn't play?
Yeah. Clarkson, even with Mitchell in, like this is one of those guys that he's been bad this year, and it's just going to cost me money until he figures out how to shoot. He's 5,300. He's still playing 25 minutes typically, give or take, in competitive games. He shot 1 for 13 from the field last time out. I'm gonna, even if Mitchell's in, I'm gonna go back to some Clarkson just for the tournament upside that he gives you. But if Mitchell's out, then yeah, you're getting more minutes for Ingles, you're getting more minutes for Clarkson. There's more usage to go around as well. Mike Conley would look better. So yeah, obviously a huge impact if Mitchell does sit.
Yeah, by the way, I could argue with people in YouTube chat all day about Rudy Gobert's injury status. And yeah, so here's actually, I'm going to go to the NBA. If you guys go to, if you Google NBA official injury report, you could see what the teams actually post for injuries. And you could, I'm going to post that in chat right now. And then you could just see that page. And all right, there it is in chat right there. Copy and paste that. You could see what all of the actual teams list as the injury report. And what I was saying before about copy paste and what Adam was saying is that once one player or one person reports that Rudy Gobert is out because they've looked at the injury report on, because Rudy Gay is out. There's 2 Rudys on the Jazz. Somebody just looked at that and said, oh, look, Rudy's out. And they actually said Rudy Gobert instead of Rudy Gay. Then everybody else just ran with it. And they start saying, hey, Rudy Gobert's out when there's no truth to that whatsoever. So yes, I know he's listed out on FanDuel and DraftKings, guys, but it's just incorrect information. So that aside, anything else here that we should be talking about from the Jazz standpoint?
Rudy Gobert is really, really good, and he's a good play tonight when he does suit up for the Jazz and play his normal minutes. He's been great this year. I mean, he's obviously always been good, but his usage rate's up a little bit this year. His rebounding has been excellent. He leads the NBA with 26 rebound chances per game. Next closest is Valanciunas at 23.1. Gobert is averaging 2 minutes less per game, 2.5 minutes less than Valanciunas, just getting an insane amount of opportunities here. He's converting at a high rate. He has a 29.1% total rebounding percentage. That should come down a little bit going forward, but just playing really, really well. 1.39 DraftKings points per minute so far this season. Should play 32 or 33 minutes, assuming this game's close. So I like going back to Gobert at 8,600.
All right. Yeah, I don't have an issue with that either. Also, Rudy Gobert's rebound numbers this year, totally ridiculous. And the reason they've been so high is, other than that Rudy Gobert has always been a really good rebounder, is pace of play is up across the league. Also, with the new rules where they're calling less fouls, offensive efficiency is down and there's way more missed shots. So as a result, who's picking up all of those missed shots? It's Rudy Gobert. Gobert has more games with 20 plus rebounds this year than games with less than 16 rebounds. So Gobert for the season now is averaging 17.6 rebounds per game. He's going to just have a crazy kind of rebound total unless the NBA laxes on how they've been calling some of these fouls. So yeah, I'm with you, Rudy Gobert, especially if people are going to be confused with this injury status and not playing him. I do think that he's somebody who it makes sense to get to. Maybe it would be in our favor if DK and FanDuel never update that situation.
I feel like these people just never like played telephone in elementary school or something and like realized how like something gets changed really quickly.
And the thing that I do think is funny is this almost certainly originated from an intern. It was definitely an intern at some point who just looked at the injury report for at RotoWire or ESPN or whatever and just wrote it in wrong. And then just everybody else is like, oh, we have to write that Rudy Gobert's out because this place already said it.
I mostly feel bad because like I was looking at the DraftKings thing. I mostly feel bad for whoever had to take the time to do the analysis, to play Hassan Whiteside and Eric Pascal because Gobert is out. Like you just completely wasted your time writing about an injury that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and this is just consuming chat right now. I think somehow people have gotten confused about this now. We're like, wait, is Rudy Gobert playing? Is Rudy Gay hasn't played the entire season, but now people are getting confused with that as well. So this is the debate that'll rage on for the rest of the day. Maybe, guys, do us a favor. When you're liking this video and you're subscribing to our YouTube channel, leave us a comment and tell us, do you think Rudy Gobert is going to play in tonight's game? Maybe as an added bonus, do you think Rudy Gay is going to play today also? Leave a comment below and we'll tally it up at the end of the day. Last 2 games on the slate are going to be a little bit funky from a DFS perspective, potentially. We've got the Phoenix Suns at home against the Houston Rockets as 10.5-point favorites. The Lakers at home against the Thunder as 13-point favorites. So before we go into these games individually, I'm just going to ask you, are you concerned about blowouts at all? And is that going to impact your ownership on these games?
Not overly concerned. I mean, it is a concern, like, maybe take a minute or so off the projection for guys. But one thing that I think we've talked about a lot, it's always more concerning for the team that would, in theory, be getting blown out than the one that would be winning. Because typically, like when you look at Phoenix, when you look at the Lakers, if they blow out Houston or Oklahoma City, respectively, you might lose a few minutes from guys like Devin Booker or Chris Paul, but they're probably producing at a higher than average rate. So it makes up for it. Whereas the team getting blown out, they're not scoring points and then they're potentially losing minutes. So it can get really ugly for them. So, it matters, but it's not something that I'm going to be overly concerned about.
All right. And as I mentioned before, guys, today's show is sponsored by PrizePicks. If you're new to PrizePicks, head on over to the site. And if you use the promo code Awesemo, get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. And that's a great way to start building your bankroll. That is free money, and there's all different ways to play over at PrizePicks. But one thing that is really useful, we have a player props tool over on Awesemo.com. You can compare some of the numbers and the projections in our player props tool to some of the props and projections over at PrizePicks. And that's a really good way to find which of the numbers over there have leverage. And once again, that is a free tool to use over at Awesemo.com, is our player props tool. But let's get into those last couple games of the slate with the wide spreads. And first, starting with the Phoenix Suns standpoint, I think we have to talk about the DeAndre Ayton situation. He's listed as questionable today. Last game, he did not play. He was a late scratch, and that led to JaVale McGee starting, but it was still Frank Kaminsky who ended up playing more of the minutes, had a massive fantasy night. So let's assume for now that DeAndre Ayton does not play. If that is the case, how are you going to be handling guys like JaVale McGee and Frank Kaminsky?
I would still want to get to a good amount of McGee, just, really, really strong fantasy producer per minute. He got the start. He only played 19 minutes. Didn't start the second half. You got Kaminsky out there. It was also actually you had Jovel, so it wasn't like it was a small matchup. They just went to Kaminsky. We saw them do that last year too. Kaminsky would kind of just come out of nowhere and then pick up minutes and play pretty well. So I think that McGee still at 3,900 has some value. Kaminsky wouldn't be surprising at all if he started here. 3,500, he would look good. If he doesn't start, I still think that he's a good value. There's just a little bit more risk. Obviously, wouldn't play Kaminsky and McGee together.
Yeah, there's definitely a negative correlation there. And I think for me, at least, I think JaVale McGee and Frank Kaminsky would both be in play if DeAndre Ayton's out. And I'm going to let the ownership dictate it a little bit to let's say that maybe people are looking at what happened last game saying, hey, JaVale McGee, maybe he starts, maybe Kaminsky starts, but people look at Kaminsky's last game and say, hey, Frank Kaminsky 40% owned, JaVale McGee 10%. Then I'd want to shade a little bit heavier towards Kaminsky. Kind of last night, how I looked at the situation with Drew Eubanks and Thaddeus Young, where I had them projected very similarly. Ultimately, both of them had really strong fantasy games, but I wanted more of Thaddeus Young just because he was projected for so much less ownership as Eubanks. I think that if Ayton is out, then McGee and Kaminsky are both good plays. I'm going to shade towards whichever one is the better value option. I mean, the lower owned of the two value options. Then in terms of the high end, Adam, Chris Paul, Devin Booker, to me, I think both of them are fine GPP options. I have some exposure to each of them in my initial build. I'm getting to both of them a little over 10%. But with that in mind, they are very popular plays. 25.6% projected ownership going to Chris Paul, 16.9% for Booker. So those are numbers I believe I'm going to be underweight to the field on. But is there anybody else on this team that you do think is a very high priority play?
So I'm with you on Paul, Booker, and if Ayton plays, I think Ayton looks good. One thing that I think people might not pay attention to that they probably should, Cameron Payne is questionable today. We've been seeing huge minutes from Chris Paul since Payne's been out because Elfrid Payton is not very good. Cameron Payne is. So if Payne's back today, Paul still could play a lot of minutes, but I think it's likely that you would see him go back to that like 31, 32 minute role that he's typically played in the regular season over the last couple of years, as opposed to the 36 minutes in competitive games that he's been playing without Payne. So that is something to keep in mind since Paul's salary is elevated now. If Payne is out and you have the potential to get 36 minutes from Paul, he still looks pretty good. If I'm going to be cutting him back to like 31 minutes, he's not going to look as good. So definitely keep an eye on that. Other than that, sort of last piece in type guys with Mikal Bridges and Jay Crowder, they're priced about where they should be, but it is a pretty good matchup for them. If Ayton is out, you potentially get a little bit more run for Cameron Johnson as well at 3,200. So no real priorities there, but you can still mix in these secondary pieces from Phoenix.
All right, then getting to the Houston side of the game, we've got guys like Christian Wood and Kevin Porter Jr. picking up some ownership. And, once again, I think these guys are viable options. I want to play 18% of Kevin Porter Jr. when he's priced at 6,400. I get that he had a really good fantasy result last game against the Lakers. He played 40 minutes, but he had 4 steals and a block in that game. Those are sort of things that I look at as a fluke and not replicable. And keep in mind, he still only ends up scoring 37 fantasy points with 4 steals and a block. So you take some of those numbers away, and it's not like he had a crazy good fantasy game for what his price was if you don't include the defensive stats. So I think Kevin Porter Jr. is going a little bit over-owned at 6,400 in this matchup against the Suns. Is there anything else from the Rockets that really stands out to you here?
Yeah, I mean, Porter's someone I'm always interested in tournaments just because in competitive games, he is playing huge minutes. All these guys on Houston, we've seen very favorable rotations for them. 39.8 minutes for Porter last game. Christian Wood played 37. Jalen Green played 37.8. Jae'Sean Tate played 35.2. In competitive games, they're playing huge minutes. Porter's not the most consistent player, the most efficient player, I should say. So for the season, he's averaging 0.91 DraftKings points per minute, but there is a lot of opportunity there between the playing time and the fact he has a 24% usage rate, 27% assist percentage. Outside of him, I think that 5,700 for Jalen Green gives you a pretty nice ceiling based on the playing time. He's, another rookie where he's producing 0.82 DraftKings points per minute. He has shot pretty poorly to open the year, 48.6% true shooting percentage, 16.5% assist percentage. So on average, he's pretty much priced where he should be, but I do think that there is just some upside there that he hasn't really tapped into yet. Christian Wood has a high ceiling, 1.23 DraftKings points per minute. If we see, if Tice is out again and we were to get Shane Goon in the starting lineup, he played 26 minutes. He is only 4,100. He would look like a pretty good value. So definitely keep an eye on that as well.
Yeah, so far this year, he's playing 20 minutes per game, averaging 21.39 DraftKings points. He sucked last game against the Lakers, but in general, he's had a pretty solid year, like I just said, from a points per minute perspective. We've yet to really see him play big minutes. He played 26 minutes in that spot, which, whatever, he struggled going up against Anthony Davis. That happens. I think there is potential for him to have a monster fantasy game should Daniel Tice be ruled out. And, if we're going to get 26 to 28 minutes from him again, then I would probably project him for right around 30 fantasy points. So, given that he's more than a fantasy point per minute guy, I do like that as a call. I currently have Daniel Tice projected as in, but once again, he's listed as questionable. It's a toe injury, and we're going to need more information on that later in the day. It's definitely stuff that we'll have covered on the deeper dive later today, also on NBA Live Before Lock. So check all that out later. All right, final game on the slate. It is the Los Angeles Lakers at home against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Lakers favored by a slate high 13 points. We've got LeBron James listed as questionable. I don't care. He's going to be listed as questionable, I think, basically every single game so far to going forward this year, and he's been listed as questionable every game to this point so far. I assume that he plays. But I want to ask you, in terms of these guys, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Russell Westbrook, all great fantasy producers individually, but they've been cutting into each other's production a little bit this year that they're all on the same team. Is there any of them that you really expect to rise above the rest going forward?
No, not really. I kind of view it as similar to the Bulls situation where any given night, one of these guys can go off because they are very good fantasy producers and, one of them might take more shots than normal or rebound better than normal or whatever, but they're all going to project as pretty mediocre options, especially with their salaries coming up. They were all, I think, 9,500 to 10K last time out. Now they're all north of 10K on DraftKings. So they're okay in tournaments where they're low owned just because you're still getting very talented players that give you a good ceiling, but they're just not going to project that well as long as everybody is active.
Yeah, so I have, for me, in the set of lineups that I ran this morning, I'm actually overweight on all of Westbrook, Davis, and LeBron just because it is a good matchup for them. The price tags aren't outrageous. I know people are looking and be like, oh, Russell Westbrook is 10,700 on DK. Yeah, but I mean, still, it's Russell Westbrook. It's not like he doesn't have upside. And I think that considering the low ownerships, I think these are contrarian options to pay up for to differentiate over. Jimmy Butler is priced pretty much the same as these guys on DraftKings. We've got Butler over 20% ownership compared to 13% ownership for Russell Westbrook. I think Westbrook has more upside than Jimmy Butler, even if his median his average projection is a little bit lower. So I think that for tournaments, I really like getting to some of these Lakers guys as flyers. Something else to keep an eye on with the Lakers. Dwight Howard is listed as questionable to play. If he's out, I don't mind taking a flyer on DeAndre Jordan. I don't think DeAndre Jordan is particularly good as a basketball player, but the Lakers have still been running him out there to play decent enough minutes. And he's still somebody who's capable of scoring fantasy points. So if we're going to get like 18 to 20 minutes out of DeAndre Jordan at really low ownership, I don't mind him as a punt play. Is there anybody on the Lakers that would stand out to you if Dwight Howard's rolled out?
So I wanted to point out with the big three as well. Westbrook has been clearly the worst of the three when they're all active. 1.13 DraftKings points per minute for Westbrook in the 6 games they've played together this year. 1.32, I think, for LeBron. 1.34 for Davis. So I would be more inclined to go to those to LeBron and Davis before Westbrook. But as far as Howard being out, it doesn't change too much for me. Jordan's been playing his 16 minutes one way or the other, whether it's off the bench or starting. He started the second half last game, but then played like a minute and went back to the bench. I don't really know what to make of that. But, at 3,400, I agree. Like he can get it done in 16 minutes. I'm not too excited about it. I don't think Howard really changes much there. I think the biggest change is that if Howard's out, you're looking at 28 to 30 minutes from Avery Bradley at 3K. On the one hand, 3K against Oklahoma City is nice. On the other hand, it's Avery Bradley, and he's doing literally nothing on this team. So it's not a very exciting option.
All right. And then on the Thunder side, to close out this slate, the first thing we have to look at is Josh Giddey, who is priced at 5,800 on DK, is also one of the chalk plays on the slate, project for 35.7% ownership. I have Giddey projected fairly well and have for a lot of the season. Josh Giddey, one of my most rostered players in best ball, which uses DraftKings scoring. So somebody who I just thought could have potential to have a pretty good rookie season. And to this point, he showed pretty good fantasy potential. He's doing it a little bit everywhere in the box score, defensive stats. He's shown the ability to rebound, assist. But Adam, do you think that it's worthwhile to be playing him at 35.7% projected ownership?
Well, part of that's going to depend on Lou Dort. Dort was out last game. You got 34 and a half minutes from Giddey. If Dort's back, I think it makes Giddey's minute projection a little bit more insecure. Like there's a decent chance you get 30, 31 minutes somewhere in there. So that would matter, especially at that ownership. If Dort's out, it just makes Giddey look even better. Like you were saying, though, he has produced very well this year, over a fantasy point per minute guy. It's not like it's a terrible matchup in terms of the Lakers being good defensively. It's more so just that they're a much better team than Oklahoma City, and that's why the spread is what it is. But it's not, it's not a matchup I'm really concerned about. I don't expect these guys to produce at below average rates. So 1.06 DraftKings points per minute for Giddey looks pretty good. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of ownership, but also there hasn't really been a lot of guys in his price range that we've liked on this slate either.
Yep, I think that's a good point. In the builds that I made right now, I am overweight to Josh Giddey even at the big price point, but that's because I have him projected for well over 30 fantasy points, which at a 5,800 price tag, that still makes him one of the better points per dollar plays on the slate for me on DraftKings. Also, as a pay-up option, I like getting to SGA. His box scores have been all over the place, but part of it too is because some of these Thunder games, they just suck and they get their ass kicked, and then you just end up seeing less than 30 minutes for SGA. But in competitive games, he's on the court a lot. He takes a whole bunch of shots. Last game against the Clippers, he played 40 minutes, 28% usage rate, ends up scoring 46 DraftKings points. He's obviously very reliant on the game staying competitive, and it is a 13-point spread. But I like SGA a little bit more than the field. How do you feel about him as a pay-up option?
I always like getting him in tournaments because he's someone where if Oklahoma City were constantly in competitive games, he'd be a lot more expensive than he is. He plays an insane amount of minutes when these games are close. He can get you 37 plus. He played 40 minutes against the Clippers. But on average, and so far this year and last year, he averages like 33 or 34 minutes per game. That accounts for the blowouts. So it makes it pretty safe to, project him around there. His assist numbers are down a little bit this year. I attribute that to Giddey, only a 20.5% assist percentage. He's only averaged 1.08 DraftKings points per minute, which is down, but he does still have a 27.5% usage rate. So I think the upside is still there for him. He's a little bit riskier than he has been in the past because not only do you have the blowout concerns pretty much whenever Oklahoma City plays, but you are losing a bit in the way of peripherals. So maybe not quite as strong an option as he was last year, but I still think he's a very high upside play. And he also, this is a spot. I don't typically care too much about correlation in NBA, or at least positive correlation. Obviously, I care about negative. But in games like this where you do have these double-digit spreads, it does make it a little bit more appealing. Like if you do happen to have LeBron or Davis or something, it does make SGA look a little bit better because if you do end up getting full minutes from those guys, there's a very good chance SGA is having a good game to keep it close.
Yeah, and I also think that should SGA have a crappy game, it seems pretty unlikely to me that the Thunder would stay competitive. So certainly a little bit of correlation from that perspective as well. In the front court, I'm getting to some of Darius Bazley on DraftKings at 4,600. The FanDuel price of 5,600 is a little bit steep for me. No other real interest for me in OKC front court players. Is there anybody from the front court you like here? And do you have any opinion on Bazley?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a strong opinion on anything. 4,600 for Bazley is fine. It's certainly not standing out to me. He's averaging 0.9 DraftKings points per minute this year. If this game's competitive, you're likely to get around 30 minutes from him. So he's just kind of a guy. I don't mind filling out rosters with him, but not going out of my way to get there. Same can be said for like Jeremiah Robinson Earl. If he starts, like if Dort's out, he gets to start at 3,500. Teo Maledon at 3,100, I think is kind of interesting if Dort's out. We saw a lot of people go to Kenrich Williams last game. And that's fine at 3,200 as well, but it makes sense for Teo Maledon to have a bigger role if Dort's out. We saw him play 28 minutes in that one, and he closed. So kind of just playing, roulette with these cheap guys on Oklahoma City where you're not expecting much, but you do have really, really cheap salaries that increase the ceiling of your lineup.
All right, guys, that is covering today's slate, and there's going to be more NBA content coming up. We've got the NBA Deeper Dive later today, NBA Live Before Lock, of course, also Adam's free article, the NBA Deep Dive. That goes up on Awesemo.com. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave us a comment. Let us know, is Rudy Gobert going to play or not? The mystery will be solved.